Okay, so this is a project done by Chloe Campbell, James Moore, and myself, Danny Graves. And we were assessing homes in the urban wildland interface. So basically what that means we did is we looked at, under our company name, Tree Rat Arbor Service, we looked at and assessed two different homes in terms of how safe they were in the event of a fire. So we took in different considerations, including vegetation, building materials, defensible space, home location, and yeah, let's get into it. The concept of defensible space is to create a buffer zone between your house and the fire. Maintaining this buffer zone is critical if you want your house to survive.
So to expand on the previous diagram of defensible space, the different zones here are laid out, zone 1, 2, and 3. Zone 1 is 0 to 5 feet from your home, so the closest space to your house. You don't really want to be planting too much here because it requires super selective and careful management of the vegetation because you don't want it to grow too much and be easily readable to catch on fire and burn your house down. And then zone 2 is 5 to 30 feet away. Here is really important to properly space out trees and shrubs that you do have and ensure that none of the shrubs are growing directly below these trees that provide ladder fuels to spread closer to your home. And then finally, zone 3 is 30 to 100 feet away, furthest from your home. Here it's just mostly important to work towards reducing energy and speed of wildfires. That comes hand in hand with flame length and the overall intensity and whether it will come in closer to your home or reach the crowns of the trees to spread. Homeowners should take active steps to minimize or reduce the fuel and fire hazard around their house, including the types of plants in their landscape. Equally as important is proper plant placement, spacing, and ongoing plant maintenance, which typically includes pruning, raking, deadheading, etc. Flammable plant material in your landscape can increase the fire risk directly to your home. Fire-resistant plants are those not readily ignitable from a flame or ignition sources. So kind of some characteristics of low-maintenance plants to include on the screen: drought-resistant, non-invasive, slow-growing, wind-resistant. Typically, you want to stick with native plants rather than something that's going to continue to spread all over your yard. Also, just to consider is horizontal and vertical growth of your vegetation. How far and how much space is it really going to take up the longer it matures? And plants that are fire resistant have characteristics but aren't limited to leaves that are moist and supple, plants that have little dead wood and tend not to accumulate dry dead material. Sap is water-like and does not have any strong odors, or resin materials are low.
We developed this home and property grading assessment sheet to both help the property owner and ourselves rank and classify how safe different homes are in the event of a fire. So we have 10 different categories, and those categories are distance to dangerous topography, which could include chimneys, chutes, saddles, and then the coinciding points, the slope of the landscape, background fuel density, defensible space surrounding structures, driveway clearance and address visibility, roofing materials. Now, roofing materials is one of the biggest and most heavily weighted categories because that's going to be what catches fire. Building exterior materials, other combustibles in proximity to structures, decks and fencing materials, and road accessibility to structure. location of the homes we assessed were on the Quimper Peninsula, which is very close to the town of Port Townsend on the Olympic Peninsula. And so basically this area is in the rain shadow, which means they get less precipitation and vegetation grows slower. And also on the right topographic map, I don't know if you can see, the home's elevation at which we assessed them was around 500 feet.
So like the Olympic Peninsula, the Quimper Peninsula has a history of logging. Currently there are only 33 acres of old growth left on the Quimper Peninsula that are protected by DNR. The specific ridge these homes were built on was last logged in the 80s, and then it was sold to developers and never managed since. So because of this, the forest is quite dense and young where these homes were built. So this photo was taken at one of the homes. It's a good example of the composure of the forest. As you can see, it is quite dense. The trees are quite young. On the forest floor, there is multiple layers of downed wood. You can see the older ones have developed moss and lichen on them. If you look up in the canopy, you can see multiple trees leaning at about 45-degree angles as they slowly work their way down to the forest floor to decompose. So there is an excessive amount of fuel in this forest. It is quite dense, which would increase the temperature of it burning. It is also a lot of fuel that is dead. Many of the trees that we're looking at in this photo are dead, in fact, and they're still standing and have not had an outside force such as weather to knock these trees down yet to become soil. So the first home we're going to look at is this one. It's 3 stories. It's at about 550 feet of elevation. It's a small lot. It's roughly 8 acres on a 6-degree slope. It has minimal exposure, almost entirely surrounded by forest, and has a very short driveway to a paved road. Just below the north arrow on the map, you can see a little bit of the pavement. So it has a very accessible road for Forest Service workers to escape in the event of a fire. But it is completely surrounded by trees. Like we showed in the last photo, young, dense forest. And we'll continue on.
So this slide is just supplementary to what James is talking about from Home 1, kind of a visual diagram of what's going on the property. We've got the main structure, the secondary building, 15 feet from the tree line. The tree line is on the south side, about 20 feet from the home, so that's really truly not too far away. Predominantly composed of Doug fir, a little bit of red cedar, and then some willow phasing out. He mentioned also that it has been thinned for sunlight and fire. And then notable low-level plants, native species are sword fern, slough, salmonberry, and maple trees.
So this home was built in 1998. The current owners have moved in around 2015. It has a Class A roof, which is about to expire, as they usually get about 20 years out of them in this region. Notably, it has a 120-gallon propane tank directly on the side of the home, which is a fire hazard. It has extruded aluminum gutters, which are not flammable, and are cleaned about every 2 to 3 years, they said. It also has complete cedar siding, as well as cedar deck, railings, and trim on the exterior of the home. Furthermore, the grounds are maintained, and there is minimal vegetation growing directly on the side of the home. So the second building on the property was built in 2005, which is a garage. It follows the same building design with the same materials, with a Class A roof, extruded aluminum gutters, and cedar siding. This home is also notably much closer to the tree line, in some areas only being 10 feet. Our assessment findings found that both structures had a high risk to wildland fire, as both structures have cedar siding and and are made out of flammable materials. They also do not have an adequate amount of defensible space, and the home itself has a 120-gallon propane tank located directly on the side of the home. While this home does have good road access to escape or for Forest Service vehicles such as Type 2 engines and larger machinery to access the home itself is not defendable against wildland fire. This photo on the right was taken before the garage was built. As told by the current homeowners, the previous homeowners cleared this land to build the garage, but also to push the tree line back on the southern flank to prevent trees from falling on the home and to reduce fuel around the home in regards to a wildland fire happening. While they have pushed back the tree line, they have failed to maintain the land that was claimed, as 15-year-old salal and other understory plants have grown up now, once again, directly next to the home and the garage. The homeowners did hire Tree Rat Arbor Care to do some thinning, as the company has thinned nearly the entire southern forest surrounded by paved roads. This was done not only for wildland fire, but also to increase sunlight to their garden. Many of the trees that were taken down were dead, standing ladder fuels, which are now on the ground. So ladder fuels have been thinned. The forest itself has been thinned, which is decreasing the competition for resources, which will help the forest mature faster and age quicker. These methods should help a little bit in mitigating the intensity of a fire coming in from the southern flank of the house, but ultimately thinning on the northern flank and the western flank would be appropriate precautions to take as well. In conclusion, these homeowners were given all the information that we found and were given recommended steps and potential actions that could be taken to increase the defendability of their home in regards to wildland fire. The second home assessment example is a 24-acre property at 500 feet of elevation on a 4-degree slope. Exposure from the south is present, and the home is entirely surrounded by forest once again. Furthermore, there's 2 driveways on this property, both being roughly a quarter-mile long, being narrow gravel roads. The home itself has created defensible space, as there is over 200 feet in all directions until the tree line. While this is the case, as you can see in the satellite photo, it has been filled in dominantly with garden beds and vegetation, which we'll talk about in a minute.
In contrast here, home 2 is quite a bit further away from the tree line, over 100 feet. Similar in nature with the Douglas fir and the western red cedar. Also has a secondary building about 15 feet from the tree line in the home. This house was heavily vegetated with various garden beds that are pretty close to the house, 20 feet away. And then one notable species to point out here is the mahonia that is about 3 to 5 feet from the home. You can see in the photos to the right that it's almost actually touching the structure itself, which is super problematic if a wildfire comes through, because these plants are just going to catch on fire and light the whole house on fire along with it. So that's one thing that should be considered to clear and prune regularly if these plants are going to stay in the places that they have been put.
The primary structure was built in 2001 with a Class A roof and extruded aluminum gutters, cleaned on a 1 to 2 year cycle. The home does have soffit vents, which are on the underside of the awnings. These vents do not close, but are covered with 3/16 mesh. The home itself is almost entirely built out of cedar, with cedar siding shingles, cedar window trim, and cedar railings and porches. This makes the home to have a very flammable design. It also has 3 porches and 1 deck, all built out of cedar. Furthermore, the home does have a 500-gallon propane tank, which has been isolated and appropriately removed from the vicinity of the home. The second structure on the property is a metal shop with a metal roof and siding. Although this building is much closer to the tree line, there is nothing necessarily directly flammable about the design of this building. Furthermore, the homeowners informed me that there is nothing necessarily flammable inside of the structure. The 500-gallon propane tank is just roughly 100 feet away from the structure. As you can see in the photo, surrounding fuels have been heavily reduced by the homeowners to protect the propane tank. Our assessment findings found that this home rates moderately in defendability against wildland fire. While this home is built entirely out of cedar products with multiple porches and a deck, it has created an appropriate amount of distance to the tree line to prevent the forest fires radiating heat and flames from reaching the home. While this is true, the homeowners have planted excessive fuel within the immediate defensive space, being multiple garden beds and small trees. This home also has 2 road access points, but both roads are long and narrow. While the homeowners have thinned almost 80% of the surrounding forest, there is still an excessive amount of fuel within the defensible space, therefore compromising the distance that they've placed between the forest and the home. While this home's roof is expiring as well, because it was built about 20 years ago, they are upgrading to a metal roof this December, which will decrease the flammability and probability of embers and spot fires starting on the roof. Furthermore, the homeowner said if they could do it again, as in rebuilding their home, they would have gone with concrete siding instead of the cedar shingles. This home assessment was complicated because although they have created appropriate distancing from the forest, they have filled it in with fuels of exotic species. Furthermore, the home itself is quite flammable. There are multiple steps these homeowners could take to reduce the probability of wildland fire reaching their home, and arguably, one of the best steps they could take is to reduce the amount of fuel planted in their defensible space. The homeowners said they are already working on thinning out their gardens and will continue to in the coming years.